Welcome to the Next Level Guy Show podcast. I'm Ian, and this is where men rebuild discipline, confidence, and take control of their lives. No hype, no excuses, just real conversations and practical tools. Let's get into today's episode. You're not in competition with anybody. You're just trying to get better than the person that walked in on day one. And that's a quote from today's guest, Rick Ellis. What if the reason you're burning out, getting injured, or quietly losing confidence isn't your age, but it's the way you actually define success? Most men don't quit Jiu-Jitsu because they're too old. They quit because their ego can't handle them not winning anymore. This week, I'm joined by Rick Ellis, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, creator of The Art of Skill, and someone who started at 41 and figured out how to train for decades, not just months, and is now a black belt teaching the next generation of students how to train, but how to train smarter and with longevity. We talk about why recovery is training, why intensity isn't discipline, and why the only metric that matters is you versus the man that you used to be. If you've ever felt too old, too stiff, or too far behind, this conversation will recalibrate how you measure progress. Because this isn't really just about jiu-jitsu, it's about longevity, identity, and redefining what winning actually means. Now, let's get to the interview, and let's get into it. Well, it is an absolute honour to have you back on. You were still one of my favourite guests, and I still follow everything you're doing. Like we talked about just now, when I looked at your black belt video, it's just tiring to watch. But to imagine that competition, the level of heart, soul, and dedication you put into training for that is amazing. But for people who maybe don't recognise the great that's sitting beside me, how would you describe who you are?
I am just a guy that loves jiu-jitsu and has never quit. I don't think of myself as anything exceptional. I think of myself as someone who has a bit of OCD. I tend to get into things pretty deeply. Whenever I discover something I'm interested in, I get into it very deeply. I tend to get bored easily with things once I've achieved a little bit of mastery. Because most things in life, honestly, aren't that hard to master. But jiu-jitsu is very different. Jiu-jitsu, the deeper you get into it, the more you realize the layers and the layers. It's like an onion. You're just peeling away at the onion. And when you're a blue belt, you think you've gotten to the core. But no, there's levels to that. So I'm just someone that didn't quit. And I'm someone that I think I'm relatable to athletes that are getting a little bit older. That's become my specialty, is helping older athletes navigate jiu-jitsu because it does change. You have to evolve with the physical reality that you're experiencing in your body. And I got injured a lot when I was younger, training and, really pushing the pace very, very hard. And I had to learn all those lessons myself. And so these days I try to maybe infuse those pieces of wisdom so that people can avoid some of the pitfalls that I have not avoided myself.
Because that's what I liked about it, because you've written a book for the older grappler, and as I was going through it, I was like, okay, I wish I'd known that before. Oh, I need to focus on that. And you break it down into the physical, the mental, competition, just dealing with the aches, pains, strains, life. And I think that's been sorely missing. But what was the sort of the need for a book at this point? Because you've got the art of skill, you're a black belt, you coach, you teach, you compete. Why did you see the need for a book just now? Were you seeing similarities in people as they got older who were struggling and maybe had to leave the sport because of it?
I've had an idea for this book for many years now, which was initially just, I thought it would be a short PDF that would just be some things that I think are important. But when I started down this path of actually writing it as a book, I realized, man, I've got 22 chapters worth of things I want to talk about. This is more than a PDF. And so I really just dug in and obsessed. I did nothing but write for about 2.5 months straight. I mean, literally from the moment I got up in the morning, from the time I went to bed at night, I had a hole in my calendar. Finally, after a long time, I hadn't had much time in my calendar. And I'm not somebody that believes in picking away at something over a long period of time. I'd rather set a goal and get it done quickly. I think it ultimately ends up better when you can obsess a little bit. So I did, and I got it done. I was a little surprised that I was able to get it done. But it's I forget the name of that principle. It's that whatever task you have in front of you will always occupy however much time you've given yourself for that task. So I
Is
gave
that
myself a
Plato?
hard deadline. Yeah, it's I don't think it's Plato, but it's not Pareto principle. It's one of those principles that
It's,
your task will always expand to fill what available time. And if you give yourself a year to complete something, well, that's too far. There are too many opportunities to get derailed on the journey of that. And so to me, it's better to just obsess and get it done. And that's what I did.
And how did you find that transition? Because, like when you've done a lot of videos, you've got the great like art skill, you're kind of focusing on this beautiful kind of compositions because you were a video engineer when you were younger. And it's not just, you don't just create videos, you create art. You really showcase
Mm.
and put a lot of love and passion into what you make. And some of your videos are breathtaking. But why did you choose writing? What was did you just have so much, because you go into great detail, but why did you pick writing as a medium for this kind of delivery?
Well, I used to write a lot, and we've all lost our attention span in this day and age of doing this all day long. I find that it's difficult for me to read long books anymore. And I used to be a voracious
But
reader, and these days it's harder. And so, and I used to write a lot. I used to take pride in my ability to write. It's a skill that's perishable if you don't practice it. And so there was just, that old love of mine to rekindle that a little bit and jump back in and see if I could do something decent, was the motivation. And there's something cool about a book. It's sort of permanent. I can call myself a published author now. I can call myself a best-selling author. What's funny is it immediately jumped to the top of the number one new release in sports psychology. It was the number one new release in martial arts for a little while, and in some other category, it was the number one seller. And so that's kind of cool. I think it's sort of I don't know, sort of completes my journey in a way to say that I've been able to write a book. And now I'm itching to write that next one. I've got some other ideas, and maybe I'll take a couple months at the end of each year going forward and try to write something.
it's dangerous, isn't it? The second you get into one, it's like a new hobby. Suddenly you're like, oh, I could do that. I could do that. I could do that. And I think it's very well deserved because it's not just a book, it's a companion piece for somebody going into jiu-jitsu, especially somebody older, because you focus a lot on like the core message on about identity, letting go, about aging, letting go of who we think we should be or competing or comparing ourselves to the younger pups instead of being that old wolf that just finds themselves through jiu-jitsu. Because you said it, where I had to write a heap of quotes out. If I wanted to master jiu-jitsu, something had to change. My body couldn't stay the same. And I think that hits home for so many older grapplers. But what version of yourself did you have to personally let go? I mean, you talk a lot in the book about your own story, which really hits home the message. But what changed in you between the younger version and the older version? Or the better version, shall we say?
Well, what I thought initially after that first day of training jujitsu, I realized that I needed to change. I had to improve my fitness. I had to learn jujitsu. I had to learn the techniques, the mechanics. I had to learn to move my body in ways that are efficient for jujitsu. And so initially, I thought that that was the work. But what you come to realize is that jujitsu, it's just a vehicle for self mastery.
Hmm.
It's just the husk around self mastery. And so the techniques we train, the things we learn in jujitsu, the struggles we face, there are so many deeper lessons in there that will weave themselves into your life on a very, very profound basis. And that was the surprising thing to me, was that there were these deeper principles that the struggles on the mat touched upon. And eventually, with training, the self-defense aspects of jiu-jitsu become far secondary. Initially everybody starts training jiu-jitsu because they want to get fit and they want to learn some self-defense. But after a couple years of training, you've got skills. You could probably handle yourself in just about any situation you'll find yourself in. But yet people continue training for years, sometimes decades. Why? Why do they keep training? Well, it's because of the deeper realizations you make. There's 10 or 12 things that I point out in the book that you gain. You gain functional strength. You gain better ability to move, movement potential. You become comfortable with discomfort. You ego management, which is massive. You become comfortable with discomfort. You stress inoculation, right? You're able to think and solve problems under pressure, and a whole bunch of other things that I think emerge naturally through training. And so that was what I think in the last chapter of the book, I talk about that initially I thought the journey would be one thing, but ultimately it's just a vehicle for self-mastery and self-improvement.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of my favorite things about it, was how jiu-jitsu isn't just a martial art. It's a discipline that shapes our life. It makes us who we are, or it helps you find yourself. I mean, how should people start seeing jiu-jitsu in that sense, rather than just as a hobby? It's something cool. My favorite celebrity does it. How should we see it as a mechanism for finding ourselves?
Well, the struggles that you face on the mat will force you to confront things about yourself. And how you train in response to those things will teach you powerful lessons as well. And for those of us over the age of 40 training jiu-jitsu, you no longer have that body you had when you were young. In my 40s, I was still pretty athletic. Yeah, of course. All of us. And I was still pretty athletic. I think at 40, you're not so far off of that. You can still kind of remember what it was like to be in your prime. But the years are ruthless, and every year you become a little less capable, a little less capable. And if you don't modify how you train for longevity and for if you don't realize that ultimately you're on your own personal journey. This isn't about you collecting more taps than anybody. It's not about you dominating the room. It's not about all these superficial things that maybe you could think about doing if you're 25. By the time you're in your 40s, you have to recalibrate what jiu-jitsu is. And it's a lifelong pursuit that will make you better in a multitude of ways, but you have to stick around without breaking yourself to be able to absorb those lessons. And so, that's probably how I would answer that.
Because it's quite a realization when you first start it, because everybody says it's a gentle art, and you get your arse kicked for, I can remember being covered in bruises for weeks, and you always find them in the most bizarre and inappropriate places. And then eventually, all of a sudden, your body just like switches on, it clicks into place, and it kind of gets used to it. But where do you see a difference or a similarity in where people struggle? Is it physical? Is it the mental aspect? Is it their ego? Is it their physically can't do it? Where do you see people disappearing along this journey? Like, because you've coached a lot of people, do they come to you and discuss the issues they're facing? Is it family? Is it health? Just wear and tear?
Well, there are many things that you're going to have to confront, and it's not one thing. You mentioned ego. Ego suppression is something that you will have to do throughout your entire journey. As a black belt, I still have to keep my ego in check because the ego is protective. It's protective of your sense of self. It hates to tap. Your ego hates to lose. It makes excuses for failure. Your ego can bring a lot of negative things if you don't learn how to accept it and be okay with it, because the mats don't lie. And unlike in the real world where we can pretend to be something we're not, and people create oftentimes a bit of a delusion bubble that they live in because we're not tested in these other realms. And jiu-jitsu, you're only as good as you are. And that's it. You're only as good as you are. You're no worse than you are. The ego will try to tell you you're much worse than you are when you don't do well. But if you can't accept that, you're simply not going to last in jiu-jitsu because it's going to be too emotionally debilitating every time you train to think that you didn't achieve this level that you think you should have. And so that's one of the things you'll have to confront. And you'll have to confront the fact that you have an older body that just isn't as capable. You need more recovery. You have to find the technical path, not the path through more physical attributes. And then, you mentioned some things like family and relationships and those things. Well, the other aspect of training jiu-jitsu is the community bonds that you make. There's something incredibly powerful about wrestling with somebody and sharing this powerful moment with them, this shared struggle with them that allows people to bond very, very deeply in ways that, we don't approximate through normal relationship building mechanisms. And so that's where I think some of those people start opening up about things in their life, their family, they feel safe with their community in jiu-jitsu because you're all in the same boat. You all have the same struggles and you're all trying to improve. So it's incredibly powerful, I think.
Because it really impacted me when I was reading it, because I saw a lot myself between white to blue belt. That comparison. Every roll was a fight. Every tap was an insult to my masculinity. And it kind of, I was reading it and I almost felt a wee bit ashamed because I saw how I had fallen into the trap of, I was doing jiu-jitsu to try to be this version of myself I thought I was, rather than just enjoying this thing and learning it and embracing this great body of people. And I ended up walking away from it after an injury. And it's one of my biggest regrets because I'd started to find my pressure passing style. I'd found a way of expressing myself through my own game. And I think that really hits home in the book is how you really do. It's not just a technique book. It's like that therapist coach that we need as we're doing it, and how we don't fall back on the excuses of, oh, I've got family. Oh, I can't go. I've got my kids' party. I've got this. I've got that. Have you had that kind of feedback from other people? That kind of, you're actually let me speak the truth rather than hide behind my fallacies?
Yeah, very, very much so. And what you described as a white belt, blue belt is what we all have to go through. That was me as well. I had a lot of ego wrapped up in who I was on the mat. And as a result, I didn't allow myself to be very vulnerable on the mat because I had something to prove. And ultimately, that's going to slow you down. Even if you're young doing jujitsu, if you maintain a high level of intensity every time you train, it's very difficult to add new components to your game. You're just reinforcing the old patterns. And so your ego has to allow you to let go of some of that. But yeah, those lessons, we all have to go through them. And I went through every single one of them, and I still go through some of those things even now. It's just a never ending, confrontation of who you are, the gap between who you are and who you think you are. And so you have to just make peace with that.
Because that was the great thing about it. It was in chapter after chapter where you were saying, basically you think black belts have it all, and you were saying, well, you struggle at this age, roles are like this, you have to warm up in a certain way because your body won't negotiate with you. It's great to see an insight into, just because you go up a belt doesn't mean you're any better or any worse or you don't deserve it or whatever. That there's just a whole new range of problems that you become aware of. And I can remember going in and thinking, I have no rite of passage, so I don't know how to do this, and I'm going to drop out here because I don't know how to do this challenge. And I'm going to go and become a podcaster. I'm going to go away and do a sport where I can hide in the shadows. I could feel this kind of stress and strain rather than just going, a great bunch of people, it's a fun activity, I'm enjoy it and go home. Yeah. I was seeing this as a kind of oh shit, like people are judging me. But it's not that at all. People are glad to see new training partners and things like that. Is a big thing we don't have the modern rite of passage that we can use social media to hide who we truly are.
Yeah. Well, some of that is reinforced by the fact that jiu-jitsu is a meritocracy, and we wear colored fabric around our waist that signifies rank. And on the positive side, that belt that you wear is accountability, right? It forces accountability, because you might not feel worthy of that blue belt the day it's tied around your waist. And so you're confronted by this gap between who you think you are and who you need to become. And so it's always going to motivate you to get to that next level. And to me, that's probably the greatest strength of the belt system, is that it forces accountability. But there's a dark negative side that comes with that. And that is the idea that if you're a blue belt, you have to tap all the white belts. If you're a purple belt, you better tap everybody below. And you start developing this false metric, because it's unrealistic to think that you're going to be able to defeat everybody at a belt below you. For one thing, humans come in all different sizes and shapes and have different athletic profiles and different ages. And, if you're a 48-year-old purple belt training a couple times a week, it's unrealistic to think that you're not going to struggle against a good blue belt who's 30 and who trains 5 days a week. And so sometimes, and that, everything circles back to the ego. And so we tend to magnify this thing of jiu-jitsu, whereas it's better to just think about it as just you versus the old you. The only reason you're training is because you're on your own unique path. You're trying to get better. You're not in competition with anybody. You're making small improvements, small epiphanies every time you train, and those things compound over many years. And so it's better to not think about the other training partners that you might be struggling with, because they're on their own journey as well. But that's hard. That's hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a bit where you talk about an equation of like how if you come like a brown belt might think, oh, people go, oh, high level of skill. But when you actually compare a brown belt against a very younger, more physically dominant purple belt, it's not an actual brown versus purple skill development. You have to associate the skill level, the athleticism, the strength, the size, the weight difference, and it really kind of hits home like how we compare ourselves. It is our own individual paths, but it's really hard to do that when your ego's going, oh, you tap to him, that means he's better, or you suck because you didn't beat so and so. How much is ego disguised as discipline as keeping us safe in jiu-jitsu rather than it holds us back?
Yeah. What was the first thing you said? You said something I wanted to respond to, and I just spaced out. There was a good point I wanted to make. I hope you can cut this out, because I totally lost my train of thought.
I have this amazing way of waffling, and people kind of go, "What the fuck is he going to get to that point?" I think it was more about the comparison, the ego, you look
okay.
We hold ourselves against by judging. Well, we didn't tap, we didn't win.
People, as I said, come in all different shapes and sizes. And in combat sports, there are weight classes for a reason, because weight and size and strength, those things matter hugely. I make the point in the book that in the UFC, there's a 15-pound difference between middleweight and welterweight. 15 pounds. That is a rounding error in jiu-jitsu, because we all roll with everybody. And so the Gracies came up with a great formula, and I think it really works. And that's called the Boyd belts. And the Boyd belts is the idea. It was named after an over 60 black belt who wanted to turn in his black belt. He wanted to get demoted because he was increasingly struggling against younger athletes. And so the Boyd belt principle holds that every 10 years or every 20 pounds equals a belt in terms of difficulty, not technical difficulty, in terms of physical difficulty. So if you're a blue belt who's 40 and you're going against a blue belt who is 30, that 10-year gap makes it feel like rolling with a purple belt your age. And again, not technically, they didn't magically get better, but in terms of the fact that their body can simply do more. You're having to diffuse their athleticism with your own body that's giving you less. And so your perception of the challenge is going to be similar to that of you going with a purple belt your age. And so when you do that math with the people you train with, maybe you're going against a guy who's 10 years younger and he's 20 pounds heavier. Well, 20 pounds is one belt, 10 years is another belt. There's two belts right there. So that blue belt you're rolling with is really a brown belt in terms of the overall physical challenge you face with that. And it's really important to keep that in mind because, again, we have this idea of representing our belts perfectly. If you're a blue belt, you want to tap all the white belts, but you have to keep all that in mind and understand that ultimately you are just on your own journey. This has nothing to do with anybody else. It's a comparison between you and the person that walked in to the academy on day one.
Because one of the big eye openers I found, especially in it, was how you talked. It was about how not to run, but with comparing ourselves to others, not trying to win every round, but to actually find ourselves through the sport, go on our own paths. But what point does competitiveness, comparison, when does it become not healthy, but actually goes into the realm of self-harm, like it is actually holding us back? Because I still really struggle with that. Like I still feel that people are judging me, people are comparing me, and nobody's even batting an eyelid. But I was taking a win as a great role, and I would tap as that was a crap weekend, and I would think about it and compare myself and beat myself up about it for days after. When does it become self-harm compared to actually a healthy version of that?
Well, we all are competitive. If you train jiu-jitsu, you're competitive. I'm still competitive, and I don't always roll as mellow as I should because you're facing this opponent and the ego and all those things. So that's something that will follow you throughout your entire journey. You will never perfectly master that. But, again, each one of us is on our own pathway. And if you train at maximum intensity all the time, not only are you going to be more injury prone, because it's when we're pushing beyond, sometimes we've pushed ourselves at a high volume of jiu-jitsu in a training session. You're in your 8th round, 9th round, 10th round, and you're still pushing. Well, that's when the injuries can happen for sure, when your form degrades. But also, what happens when you're pushing really hard is the only thing you're going to be able to play is your A game. And your A game is a very small subset of your overall game. We have an A game, a B game, and a C game, which is like a pyramid. And the C game are all the new things that you're learning that haven't bubbled up yet, that you're not all that great with yet. The B techniques are the ones that are, pretty well, but they're not the ones you necessarily look to in crunch time when you have to get something done. Well, if you train with only that small subset of your A techniques, you're never going to be able to expand and grow and add new techniques. Pianist doesn't learn a piece at concert tempo. You always have to slow things down. And in jiu-jitsu, it means dialing the intensity down so that you can, and it takes two to tango. But if both parties can reduce the intensity, then what happens is you hold the windows of opportunity open a little longer so that you can think and problem solve and make those adjustments that let you keep practicing the new things you're working on so that they bubble up and become something you're very, very good at. So ultimately, if you train hard all the time, you are slowing down your own progress and you're a little bit more injury prone for sure.
Because there's that great part where you said in the book, I had to write it down. If I ask myself whether I should do one more roll, it probably means I shouldn't. And that hit home so many times of, that one last one for the road is always the one that you tweak a muscle or you get hurt or you do something stupid. And it's a great sign of we need to be smarter as we age. But when does,
Yeah. Well,
how.
or it
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, or that extra roll or two, it prolongs your recovery, which means you might not be able to train as often. And to me, the best value is to train with as much frequency as possible, because ultimately that's going to let you develop the fastest. But if you're so beat up from training that you can't train again for 4 days, then you're ultimately really slowing down your development. And so by keeping yourself a little bit more mellow and not rolling that extra round or two. And listen, I used to be the guy that never took a round off, even until somewhat recently. Just in the last few years, I finally got to a point where I was like, man, I can't do every roll. I can't do every round. And then you start recalibrating with that reality and realize, no, I'm going to keep myself within. I can do 6 rolls, 7 rolls if I'm feeling good, maybe 5 one night I'm not feeling so great. And if I stay within that, it means I can come back and train in 2 days versus 4 days. So ultimately, it's going to make you a better martial artist. That constant exposure to the art is going to let you progress much, much faster, even if you're keeping the intensity low.
Makes a lot of sense because until you're doing it, you enjoy it so much, and wakes this sort of like primal version of you. Especially if you're winning, you think, "Oh, just one more," and then something just tweaks. You fall back, they land on
Yeah.
you heavy, and suddenly you're out for a few days, or you can barely walk up the stairs to your work, or whatever it is. And do you think that's a thing? As we get older, restraint becomes harder than effort. That moment of, I know I would like to, but I shouldn't. We actually need to be smarter as we age.
Yeah, I'll quote my professor, Roy Dean. He says that sometimes the discipline is the discipline to know when to not train, not just the discipline to keep yourself training. And so, yeah, and listen, it's fun. Rolling is the most fun thing in the world for me. Man, to say no to a roll is very, very difficult. But yeah, I have to understand that we simply get more fragile. Every year, I feel a little bit more fragile than I did the year before in a noticeable way. The joints become less elastic, the max heart rate declines, the spinal column you've got bulging discs from bad posture for so many years, and your hips don't open up. And, we're all on this slow decline. And so accepting that reality and finding a way to keep training so that you can continue to make consistent progress, because the only pathway to success in jiu-jitsu for the older athlete is through better technique. That's the only pathway. When you're young, you can go do all the strength and conditioning, and we see that in competition. Guys they are a perfect combination of highly technical and highly physical, and that's awesome to behold. But once you're over 40, over 50, over 60 for sure, the physical path, sure, keep yourself in shape, lift weights, stay strong, right? We need to maximize our physical attributes, but you're never going to overcome that 20-year age gap. And so how do you defeat someone who's bigger, faster, stronger? Well, you have to be more technical, better timing, better feel, better sensitivity, better understanding, better knowledge. All of these things that can continue to improve year after year after year, even though your physical attributes are declining every year. And the game becomes, can I keep moving the technical line? Can I keep moving this up year after year as my physical attributes do this? Because we don't want them both to decline, or then you're not going to be effective at all. You need at least the technique to keep improving. And so, yeah, it's strategic. And it's frustrating because you can't train as much as you'd like and you can't push as hard as you'd like. But ultimately, that's the path that's going to make you able to deal with size, strength, and skill without having to match that.
Because it is a really core message in the book about the need for sustainable training, to how we have to actually focus on longevity and staying. And you said old guy jiu-jitsu isn't a consolation prize. It's what efficient jiu-jitsu looks like when the goal shifts from winning exchanges to winning years. And that really hit home to me. I was like, I would go in and think, I only do well by winning every round. Whereas actually just getting in the door, meeting some mates, having a laugh, learning a skill, developing my own self-defense and just ability to master my own body and control myself, etc. And grow emotionally as much as physically is actually a real thing I should be focusing on. And what does staying mean to you now? Compare it to, it's not just winning, but is it improving? Is it just getting more years on the mat? Is that how we should approach our jiu-jitsu training?
Well, if your goal is to make jujitsu a lifelong pursuit, then you have to train at an intensity level that allows you to do that without breaking your body. Jujitsu is hard on your body no matter what. And, I've got some neck issues now, some back issues. I've got things that I've done to myself just by virtue of the fact that I've trained a lot of jujitsu. And so you have to ask yourself, what is the end goal? Well, if the end goal is to continue to get the benefits of jujitsu and minimize the negatives, which is a broken body, well, it requires training with intention. And, any one role means nothing if you think about it. I mean, how many roles have you had in your journey? Thousands. I've had tens of thousands. Can you remember every one of those roles? Of course not. Any one role is just a moment in time. Whatever that result, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that in that moment you won, you lost, whatever. It's maybe you retired, maybe whatever. It means nothing. So we have to zoom out a little bit and ask ourselves, why are we training? If we're training for longevity and to get the deeper benefits of jujitsu, then we have to just let go of that momentary competitiveness. And look, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be competitive and you shouldn't crank up your jujitsu now and again. Sometimes I'd be writing these chapters in the book, and I thought, man, I sound like a wimp, like I'm just preaching energy conservation and longevity. Well, no, I mean, during my own journey, I've had to sharpen the knife, and I've had to get myself to peak physical condition, and I've had to do hard things. And I think that that's important to do because there are lessons in the preparation of that you will gain that you can't get any other way. But that can't be the default setting. You can't make competitiveness your default setting when you're over 40, or you're just going to start wearing your body out. You're going to start getting those lingering aches and pains, those repetitive use injuries. You're not going to grow as much for the reasons that I mentioned a minute ago, that you're just playing your A game. And everything seems to always circle back to the ego. It's just managing the ego and telling yourself that any one role, it doesn't matter. No one's judging you. Nobody cares, honestly. If you get tapped 3 times in a row, nobody in the room cares. We tend to magnify that.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? Is like if you ask somebody away from the mats, and they would say logically that they are looking to train for as long as they can. But if you then watch them in a match, or if you watch them in a training session, they emotionally chase the intensity. And the book's littered with prime examples of how we screw ourselves up by our approach, by chasing the young people, by fighting every roll rather than tapping early and beginning again. Like thinking about ourselves, our longevity, our recovery as much as what happens on the mats.
Yeah.
What habits do you see with older grapplers, especially, that is screwing them up, that is damaging their longevity?
Well, it's just what you said. It's that competitiveness. by virtue of the fact that we wear these belts that signify rank, and we tend to be competitive. And honestly, it feels good. Once you're in shape, it feels good to push hard. I mean, I love intense training. There's something about it that feels more honest. It feels more real. It feels more like you're tapping in more into the essence of a combat martial art when you're really being pressured and you're having to solve hard problems very dynamically. And in some ways, it feels more productive, like we're training more productively. And when you walk out of the dojo feeling absolutely depleted and you can barely get to your car, and you open the car door and you're just easing yourself down into the seat, there's something about that feels good. It
Mhm.
feels like you improved. It feels like you're okay. You're showing discipline and dedication by pushing hard. Uh, and there's a place for that for sure in jiu-jitsu. Sometimes you need to do that. But again, you can't make that the default setting. So that's probably the biggest pitfall that older grapplers have, is that if they train that way all the time, it's a slower journey and they're going to get injured. That was me. That whole decade in my 40s, I've got that famous chart of all my injuries that I've put on my videos a few times, where I show 20 different things, pointing at my elbow, my knee, my this, and that. And most of those things happened during that decade where I was refusing to accept that I was older and I was just going to be the best jujitsu guy I could be. And you realize that's just not the way. It's not a sustainable path. And everyone will eventually have to learn those lessons. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. You're going to have one too many injuries, and then you won't see a reason to come back.
Because we wear them with like a sense of like a badge of honor, don't we? We kind of look and go,
Yeah,
"Oh, I used to do this," or "I hurt my knee while I was doing this," or it's like the Al Bundy, "I scored 4 touchdowns in a single game" kind of approach and married to children. It's like we look
right,
at these
right.
things as, "Oh, I used to be able to do that," or we hold on to these little moments rather than thinking, I could still be doing it if I had just been a bit more sensible. And there's a really vivid moment in the book, is your first roll, where you're talking about your limbs are filled with sand, your heart's pouncing and bounding against your rib cage. You can barely get oxygen in, and this guy's just throwing you around, and you're just getting beaten up. But you're sitting there just completely destroyed, but you're fit, but you're not jujitsu fit. And it's
Yeah,
such a different level of challenges and extreme kind of goals and things that we have to endure. But as we age and recovery slows, how should we start looking at recovery and the true cost of a session, so we can actually do this long term and not just have a great role and then never come back?
yeah. Well, we tend to think that recovery is just something we do after training. There's the training, and then there's the recovery. But recovery is training. You have to recalibrate how you think about recovery, because recovery is just as important a part of training as the training itself. And I've come to believe that you have to engage in active recovery. Just doing nothing for a couple days after training before your next session, that's just a way to make sure that those lingering aches and pains never really go away. Because what you need is blood flow, right? Recovery requires you to get your heart rate up a little bit, get your joints mobilized, get your joints moving. We lay in bed for 8 hours a night, and your joints will stiffen up sometimes. You get out of bed and you're stiff in the mornings. Well, you need to move. And so I've really come to realize, especially every year as I get older, that recovery means a little yoga in the mornings. Recovery means doing a little bit of mobility work to get those joints going, get those hips moving. Recovery work means going on walks and getting that blood flow. Recovery means sunlight, means eating well, means electrolytes and hydration. It means, all those things, which as you get older, all those little details are much more important than they were when you're young. When you're 20, you can eat pizza every day and go train every day and party all night with
How I miss those days.
cost. Oh my gosh. Yeah. But we can't do that. So yeah, I think the biggest shift for me is this understanding that recovery is just as important as the training itself. And you're robbing yourself of quality training if you don't recover with intention.
Because another R word that came out from like your recovery session, because you go into great detail about hydration, sleep, like dynamic warm-ups, all this, like you have this great stuff that so many people would benefit from just by reading as they started to train. But one thing that really hit home was how we don't base our recovery on reality. We base it on our ego. And I think a great thing I took from the book was the art of sustainable training. Because where you said it was hundreds of small adjustments, and you focus on things like movement, recovery, ego, preparation. If somebody wanted to, train for decades, what does sustainable training actually look like for an older grappler, for say a fat guy sitting on the side of the microphone who's asking, how do I go back and train sustainably and survive against these morons with the six packs and endless gas tanks?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said the adjective you used was this fat guy. And so I think that one of the things, especially for us older athletes, that you can do to help your jiu-jitsu is simply shed all those useless pounds that you're having to carry around every time you train. Because fundamentally, jiu-jitsu is a movement art. It's an art in which we are moving ourselves in and out of position. You're moving yourself into positions where you have some offensive opportunities or out of positions of danger. And we're not really moving our opponents. Yeah, we are, but it's based on leverage and our positioning more than anything. And so the question is, what can you do to allow yourself to move better? Well, one of the simplest ways is simply shed those pounds that are useless. And so I'm definitely an advocate of staying lean. Your pressure game won't be quite as good, admittedly, but everything else about your game will improve. Your mobility, it's less wear and tear on your joints, carrying less weight. So that's part of it, is looking at the machine that you have realistically and saying, okay, what can I do to build a machine that can handle the demands of jiu-jitsu? Because they're pretty intense. It's basically wrestling is what we're doing. And it's pretty intense physiologically. So what things can you do as an older athlete? Well, work on your mobility. People focus way too much on strength and they don't focus enough on mobility, I think, right? Because strength gains can happen really quickly. You go to the gym for 6 weeks and now you're 30% stronger than you were 6 weeks ago. So it feels real productive to do that. But if you're loading weight onto a body that has structural deficiencies and isn't mechanically optimized to being able to do this stuff, you're just going to get hurt. So I always recommend to older athletes, assess your body first. Maybe enlist the help of a good physical therapist, a good exercise physiologist, a good strength and conditioning coach who really understands biomechanics, and assess your body and figure out, where are you weak? Where are you strong? Where are you rigid? Where are you flexible? Get an accurate picture so you can start attacking the things that are deficiencies, so that you can give yourself a body that's constituted in a way that can handle jiu-jitsu without breaking down. And that's fundamental. So before adding another strength and conditioning session, before doing all this other stuff, just ask yourself something more fundamental. Is your body constituted for jiu-jitsu? And then start there. And I think a lot of those things matter more. The yoga, all those things matter more as an older athlete, because you're asking your body to do, a lot in jiu-jitsu.
It's time for a quick break. There are millions of potential products to buy, so how do you know which ones are worth your hard-earned money? Simple. You go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and explore those that will transform and improve your life. You'll find deals, listener exclusives, and special offers with some great companies. Recommendations are 100% honest and only on items Ian has tried or believes in. The companies showcased will make you a better man in all areas of your life. Simply go to nextlevelguy.com/affiliates and level up.
Because a big thing that came across when I first started was I thought pressure passing was just putting your weight on a person. But when you actually see how to actually control and dominate and transition, and like there is so much more into pressure passing than simply just being heavy and laying basically on top of somebody. And it suddenly comes across as it's all about more technique, more effort. It's more actually understanding of true control and not just white knuckling and trying to throw somebody before they get you kind of thing. But I love this emphasis you have about movement over strength. Is that what we forget? We try to be stronger to compete with people rather than having a body that can actually cope with the demands and meet the conditions we need to be good at jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, well, you mentioned something very important, which is that you initially are trying to use strength to make your pressure passing game work. But really, when you go against somebody who is very, very skilled, but they're very, very light, and yet they can apply immense amounts of pressure, they feel impossibly heavy. The question is, what is that? What are we feeling that? Because that's not body weight. And it's sort of like when you see a circus performer lay on a bed of nails. Well, they can do that because they're distributing their weight across 200 nails versus putting one nail in the board. And now, you're not going to be able to do that because you're concentrating all your weight on that one point. Well, that's pressure. It's aligning your skeleton, aligning your body in relation to your opponent's body, understanding where to pin, understanding where to create wedges, understanding how to position yourself to maximize the effect. And that becomes, the true expression of pressure, whether it's passing, whether it's, pressure, whether it's pressure from the bottom, right? We can apply pressure from anywhere. And the principles are all the same. It's aligning your skeleton, using frames, using, body, bone structures more than anything else. And those are techniques, right? That's a much more sophisticated understanding than just throwing your weight on someone and trying to squash them that way.
Because it kind of really hit home when I was reading the book. Is like I felt vindicated because I had started getting really good at really pressure passing people, really controlling them, going into headquarters and going into kneecap passes and things, and like swinging legs into places. So it basically made me, I couldn't go anywhere else but into mount, or there was all these kind of little tricks I was developing. And when I read how you were in the book, you were saying about how a good older athlete shouldn't try to compete explosively. We should look to control the person, transition, inch by inch, move slowly through it. Is that the beauty of like flow passing, figuring out how to be heavy rather than strength? We actually figure out how to use our body and control other people's by learning that phenomenon?
There are fundamentally two ways to play jiu-jitsu. There's the faster, more dynamic athletic style, and there's the slower, more methodical, control-based style. And these aren't two separate ways. They're just two ends of a continuum. And older athletes or more advanced athletes will naturally be drawn to the more control-based style of jiu-jitsu because it lets you be effective without doing as much with your body, right? The athletic style requires you to redline yourself all the time, whereas the controlled style, you can be relaxed and you can be effective without doing a whole lot. In fact, when you watch high-level practitioners, sometimes it doesn't really look like much is going on. And then one of the two people will advance their position slightly, 6 inches. They're 6 inches from where they were, and yet now they're able to lock down and control that new position. And now they're 6 inches farther. And so it becomes much more incremental. And that's something I think people will naturally be drawn to as they get older, and as their physical attributes decline, you realize that you have to play this more incremental style. And it sounds like you're already on that journey.
Yeah, I loved it. I can remember that moment of kind of like, is this cheating? Because it felt like I was actually controlling people who used to kick my arse. And I'd be kind of like, oh, if I get them here, can, pass into them and then get hold of like body locks or stack passes. And suddenly I was like, oh, I mean, this is something I can do. And I actually felt like I was almost cheating in a way. And I actually asked the professor at the time, should I stick to pressure passing? Should I learn the other styles? And he told me to stick at it because that's what older grapplers should be doing. And, he was saying, try a bit of this, try a bit of that. But it wasn't like try to match them doing the handstand, cartwheel passes, all this kind of stuff. He was like, just you be you. Is that what a lot of older grapplers forget? Is jiu-jitsu is a personal expression of who we are, our history, our injuries, our what we've happened in our lives before, and we're expressing ourselves through how we perform jiu-jitsu. There's not one size fits all.
Yeah. Yeah. Ultimately, you're going to have to find your expression that works for you, for your body type, for your mental attributes, how you think about the game of jiu-jitsu. It's a deep art. It's a broad art. There are hundreds of techniques in jiu-jitsu. And I've used this analogy before. I call myself a recovering musician these days because I don't play a lot anymore. But back in my 20s and my teens, I was obsessed with music. So in music, there are only 12 notes, at least in music of the West, right? Classical, jazz, funk, pop, rock, blues, all those styles. There's only 12 notes. A piano only has 12 notes. They get repeated at octaves, but there's only 12 notes, which means that all of those musical styles, and they are very, very different, they all use the same ingredients. Well, in jiu-jitsu, we have only 13 things that we can attack: shoulders, elbows, wrists, hips, knees, ankles, and a neck. That's 13 things, which means similar to music, you play jazz, I play rock, right? In jiu-jitsu, your game can be vastly different than mine, even though all we're doing is manipulating these same 13 spots. That never changes. Sort of the meta principle never changes, but your expression is yours. My expression is unique to me. And the things that I can do, the things that I make work in my game, they may not be right for you. They may, be counterproductive to you. So yeah, ultimately, each person is going to develop their own game. And I think that's really the blue to purple journey more than anywhere else, is because from white into blue belt, you're just having to learn everything. But then as you get into purple, you're throwing away the things that don't really work and you're arriving at your game. And then the whole rest of the journey from purple to, coral belt is just refinement, mostly of the things that you like to do. Not that you shouldn't work on everything, but your focus will be primarily on the things that are unique to you.
Because you said in the book about how we knew in our bones if we deserved the belt, and how a problem a lot of people have is they try to honor the belt. They try to defend the justification that we owe, that we are justified to have that level of belt. So we need to act like it. And if we lose or get tapped, we see it as a slight against their skill. And, you talk about Boyd, who was going to go down, demote himself because he didn't feel like he could keep up with the young people. Is that something that we forget? We don't base it on our skill, our journey, our self-expression. We look, we don't look at have we grown under pressure, because everything in jiu-jitsu happens under pressure. But do we look at it as again, the ego rather than the evolution of who we are?
Yeah, well, that ego, you have to manage always. Every day you train, you have to manage your ego and keep sight of the fact that you're only ultimately in competition with your old self. And that's the only metric that matters, is how would you do against that person. And by that measurement, each one of us would do great, right? Even with 2 weeks of training, you're going to beat your old you.
No.
And so we forget that, we get caught up in the, the idea that you have to represent your belt perfectly and all those things. And yeah, everything always seems to come back to the ego in some way. And that's very, very powerful. Really, it's developing humility. Some of the most humble people I know are some of the most deadly killers in the world. And yet you're like, man, line up 99.9% of the world population and you would be able to defeat them. But yet these people are insanely humbled. Why? Why are they so humble? Because that humility has been forged through failure.
No.
Year after year after year of having to tap and realizing that there's always someone better than you. And you can't always tell. You look at this person you bump fists with and you're younger, you're bigger, you're stronger, but yeah, they make you feel like an idiot. So you develop a humility because you can't tell by looking at someone whether they're good at jiu-jitsu or whether they're a skilled martial artist. So yeah, those things are all very, very important ultimately to keep the journey about you versus your old you.
I can still remember that first time I went into a competition class, like it was Gracie Baja, and it was like you went in and actually rolled with blue belt and above, whereas we had kind of stuck at they had basically taken it easy on us, let's put it that way. And when we went into this advanced class, I remember I shot for a double leg, and I was thinking I was the bee's knees. I was doing really well. I just got promoted to my third or fourth tab of white, and I remember this guy just straight into a guillotine like it was nothing. And then he just beat me up for about 5 minutes and then showed me some stuff after. Humble, if you like, but it was so much like, suddenly it woke me. And then I remember the first time I ever rolled my black belt, suddenly having this guy just dominate you. And he didn't need to even move very much, but his grips felt like vices. He felt like he could do whatever he wanted. And he was just toying with me. And it suddenly dawned on me when you actually understand and the art of the skill versus just trying to wing it, trying to win. But when you actually embrace it and become it, it is phenomenal. It was terrifying. I mean, I watched some of your rolls and I think it looks like you are nowhere near 60. It looks like you're about 20. You seem to just dominate and just express it, and you've just got this way of doing it. And I think that was something I really struggled with was, again, this ego thing. But for people who are coming back to it, maybe they had injuries, maybe they're stepped out, maybe they're eating like they were still training and weren't and become like the Michelin man, like a chubby guy sitting speaking to you just now. If people are going back to it, what should our versions of this be? How should we look at our goals for the going forward so we don't go in and just think, I tapped again and again and again? What should your goals, your metrics be that we're focusing on so we make a success of it this time?
Well, it depends on your level. At white belt, when you're first starting, it's nothing but failure. And you have to be okay with that. You have to be okay knowing that you don't get to be the hammer for a long time. You have to be the nail. But that's a critically important part of the journey because you're learning. I mean, how do you learn to defend against someone more skilled than you if you're not in those positions over and over and over to where you begin developing the timing and the sensitivity and the understanding of the ways in which they can dominate you so that you can begin taking action to prevent those things. So even though you're losing, you're gaining really, really valuable skills. If you approach each roll just as, look, I'm going to prolong the inevitable. They used to be able to tap me 5 times in a roll. Now he can only catch me twice. That's massive improvement. And it's about recalibrating what success is when you get older. Success isn't, did I dominate the room? Success is, did I do a little better than I did last time? Did I stay calmer than I did last time? Did I make less, um, ego-driven decisions? Was I more methodical? Was I, there's a ton of things that you can look at as positives coming back to jiu-jitsu, but ultimately it's just you versus the old you is the ultimate metric that matters, right?
Because you said in the book about is it the quality of our movement that defines us? It's not, we don't fall back to this perceived level of our abilities. We fall to the level of our training, our preparation. And does it stem from, like as we go back or as we start, we should be focusing on our timing, those little nuances, understanding where we struggle, understanding the bits that we get caught in and using that as homework and figuring out why we're doing that, not looking at it as a hurt, looking at it as a learning experience and kind of go and thanking the person for showing us that. For me, how do we understand that concept of using the quality of our movement as a focus rather than the win-loss ratio?
Yeah, well, you're touching on a couple things. Quality of movement is something that, we should all strive to improve their movement. And you mentioned that you like the way I roll. Well, that's just years of focusing on developing good movement capability and being able to, move well within my own limitations. And then you add the element of timing because, you can be quick despite the fact that you are slow in an absolute sense. Being fast and being quick are two different things. Being quick just means that you have recognized that there's an opportunity here to move and do something productively in jiu-jitsu, and your ability to then execute that thing within the window where it makes sense. And so that's how you feel quick against somebody who's faster than you, is by developing those skills. So yeah, but that's a long journey. We have to be okay with the fact that ultimately the struggles you faced on the mat today are going to inform what you need to work on, because jiu-jitsu is fairly self-directed, even though we've got a coach who's teaching us, but they're not watching you every moment. They can't advise you every day. Ultimately, you have to take some control of your journey. And the best way to do that is simply to look at the problems you're having as opportunities to grow, not as reasons to beat yourself up because you keep getting caught in this choke repeatedly. No, that's jiu-jitsu graciously giving you an opportunity to learn how to not get choked as much. And so then you go do your homework and come back and experiment, and you behave like a scientist where, hey, okay, well, I thought that was going to solve the problem. It didn't quite solve it. Let me go back to the drawing board. And over time, you'll solve all those things. The problems, as your belt darkens, the problems get smaller and smaller and smaller. As a black belt, I'm not looking to solve the big problems anymore. I'm just looking for little things, little ways to be a little bit more efficient, a little bit more, defensively competent, just making those small things. And that becomes a very fun part of the journey as well. Just looking for those little gems, those little things that can make a big difference, even though to someone looking at my game, they might think that what I'm excited about is imperceptible. They may not even see what I'm seeing there, but there's this little gap in my knowledge, this little gap in my game that I can then find something to fill that gap. And so that's the journey ultimately. Is at first you need to solve all the big things. Why is someone passing my guard, right? Why am I getting stuck in side control? Eventually those won't be nearly as big of problems, or you'll be able to turn those into little failures within bigger sequences. So you just have to solve the little stuff, over time.
No, it makes a lot of sense because in the book you have chapters on like hydration, sleep, the big parts of when we first start or when we come back to where we really struggle. And then I'm sure that everybody who's been on the mats has had this moment where you kind of go, oh, and it's like a video game where the map goes from grey to it opens up, and suddenly you can see a wee bit more of the map or the city that you're working in.
Yeah.
You go, and it links in, and you kind of understand it, and then it's the next depth or next layer of the problem, and it really kind of it opens up that thing of, right, so I understand that now. Oh, but now that causes me to get stuck in this problem or against this kind of
Right.
grappler. And it's kind of like, oh, right. And I think that's the part I enjoyed. But then when I let that ego part take over, I was kind of like, oh, fuck. But if I focus solely on learning, what was I getting stuck in? Going and watching videos. And you have this great series of guides of how to learn away from the coach, how away from the mats, using instructionals, YouTube videos, how to build a body that copes for the demands of jiu-jitsu. Is that what we should be doing? Is working on our timing, seeing what we're getting stuck in, doing our homework away from the mats, figuring out how to control a person, how to express and control our own bodies. Is that the kind of thing you should be doing, like you were saying about this journey that we take control of?
Yeah, that's the real work. That's the deeper work, is because ultimately, every belt has a character to it. The white belt and blue belt is the belt of technique accumulation, because you don't know anything, so you're having to learn everything. But then eventually you develop your own game. But by the time you get the black belt, your impulse is extreme simplification. You want to be maximally effective by doing nothing, right? That's the ultimate goal, to be able to dominate people that are bigger, stronger, faster by you doing almost nothing, right? You're so precise. You can shut people down just by you're posting there, you're wedging there, posting there, blocking there, putting your body here. And you can do these things that they don't look like you're doing much, and that's what, to me, keeps it fascinating year after year after year. Again, I'm someone that gets bored easily, but yet it's those kinds of improvements that you can make to where every year you're just a little more efficient, a little more efficient. You're able to have just a little more success. Not that you don't still have problems. I still have guys I struggle against. I still have, problems in my game. But, that focus is really just on, those little things that make a big difference. And that's something that can continue to improve year after year after year. That becomes the whole game, really. It's just, chipping away. It's sort of like when if you look at a sculptor, right, he's going to sculpt something, a human face, let's say, out of bronze or out of stone. Well, the first thing they do is chip off the big blocks, all the big stuff that isn't that thing. But then eventually it's just sandpaper. Eventually it's just very fine tooling. It's just, you're making tiny improvements in this thing, and someone watching you do that may not even notice, what did he just sand off? There was nothing there, but to your educated eye, you're like, nope, there was a little imperfection there, but I managed to get it. And that's jiu-jitsu. You're just, what you're attempting to do is perfect yourself. You're trying to achieve this perfect version of yourself, a person that's perfectly calm all the time, a person that is capable, a person that can problem solve effectively, all the things that carry over into your life. And you just want perfection in those things. And that's not something you'll never achieve. But every year you get just a little closer to that. And to me, that's the real value of pursuing this art as a lifestyle.
And do you think that's a big problem, is that people don't even focus on the big things, like hydration, sleep, ego management, movement? So we get to be like Michelangelo the turtle rather than Michelangelo the painter. We kind of we screw ourselves up by not even dealing with the big stuff, so that we can go on that journey, that we stay stuck in the mines trying to compete with the young pups rather than just find ourselves.
Well, all of the big stuff is the little stuff as well, because the big stuff, with enough work, it's no longer a big thing anymore, but it's never nothing. in other words, if you realize that you've got some mobility deficits and you spend the next couple years doing primal movements and animal movements and, all that stuff, and you develop the ability to move well now, well, great, you've solved that. You're no longer that stiff, rigid person you were a couple of years ago. You can move really well. But there's always more work to do, right? There's always a little bit more refinement, a little more refinement, a little more refinement. And so in every area, it becomes more fine grained over time, but those things never really go away.
And is there sort of three areas that you think that if you took every single person listening and said, if these people listen to these three areas, set them as your goal, like better sleep, better hydration, doing some shadow work to figure out why, to lose a bit of the ego or whatever it is there things that you jump out at you that would help everybody listening? Or is it such a personal journey, it's hard to break it down?
Well, you can certainly separate into categories. There's the physical side, of course, and all the things that affect the physical. And then there's the mental and there's the emotional. And all those things are in play. If we're talking about the ego, that's an emotional thing, right? It's trying to, doesn't allow us to tap in time, or it's, can be destructive. So I think you have to work on all those areas, really. And physically, it just starts with an assessment of where you're at. How do you move? How strong are you relative to yourself? And you answer those questions, and then you embark on a journey to solve those things. And listen, we can all do better. I'm not as disciplined as I could be. I don't always do the work. It's not like, I write a book. It doesn't mean I'm the perfect example of all of these things, but we are all a work in progress. And hopefully every year you train Jiu-Jitsu, you have made progress in all of these areas. You're emotionally a little more stable. You're intellectually more knowledgeable, more understanding. You're physically, we're declining every year. So it's not that you can solve that, but are you maximizing what you have? Because that's all we can do is, do the best within whatever physical attributes we have available to us. And so it's a multi-dimensional thing, and it's just something that you just have to keep chipping away at.
Because a big part of like jiu-jitsu, you hear people talking about like the brotherhood, the bond of the guys on the mat or the girls on the mat. What is it about the brotherhood? It becomes something that we didn't know we needed, to find this kind of group of people who will choke the hell out of you and then will hug you after. It's such a weird thing of like try to batter each other and then you love the person for it. How do we move past when we first start, move past the, okay, I need to fight this person, I need to win, I need to do this, I need to do that, to actually go past the superficial and actually build true bonds with these people and actually find our tribe of people?
Well, I think some of that happens organically. I make the case in the book, it's an entire chapter, that modern life doesn't really demand all that much from us. We live in pretty, we live under systems, whether it's political systems or just the way that our societies are structured, that they tend to funnel people from the time you're a kid. Okay, you have to go to school. Great. Now you can go get a job. Great. Now you've got a career promotion. Now, these are very sort of controlled things in our life. And that's very different than when you step on the mat and you bump fists and now you're fighting for your life because someone's trying to strangle you. And I think that there's something lost in the modern world in that we don't have rites of passage. There's, I mention in the book, a young man is not expected to wander off into the desert on a vision quest to discover their name, or they're not expected to go hunt a lion alone in the savannah, which is something that people in the savannah do, or they're not expected to, kill their Spartan foe, right? And Spartan warriors, when you got to a certain level, the next step was you had to go find someone and kill them. And so there's these rites of passage that are very, very powerful, and they sort of mark a moment in time where you've crossed this threshold from being a young man to being an adult. But in the modern world, we don't really have those types of things, those types of initiations. But jiu-jitsu is, to the white belt, jiu-jitsu is an initiation, right? It's got all those same attributes that rites of passage have, which is voluntary suffering, which is skill acquisition under duress, which is, all of the things that we experience sometimes for the very first time. And in some ways, jiu-jitsu is the first real rite of passage that we've ever voluntarily put ourselves into, where we, this thing is not going to be handed to us. We're not going to be able to fake our way. We're not going to get the promotion because we knew the right people, or because we kissed up to the boss, or because, all the ways in the real world in which we can either advance our position or, have success in ways that we didn't really earn. In jiu-jitsu, none of that is possible. Your skill is all that matters. I mean, how you express jiu-jitsu ultimately is the only thing that matters, and you're only as good as you are, right? So it's all those lessons that you get from being in that sort of tribal system where, everything is enforced through reality. Really, I mentioned the book, who to listen to because they can do the things that you can't do. You know who you're becoming because the mats tell you that unambiguously. And so it's very, very powerful. I think, jiu-jitsu is not the only thing that you can achieve these sorts of things in, but it really checks all the boxes in a way that few other things in modern life do.
Yeah, because I remember reading it and I was getting the sense of like that you start making new friends, you find yourself, that you actually feel confidence that you deserve the belt level you're at, that you actually move from the ego into developing yourself through jiu-jitsu and treating it as an art. And there was all this thing, and then it came to that question that I always hear: does an athlete, a competitor, a hobbyist, whatever level you are at, do you need to compete? Because everybody always says you never know who you are till you've competed. But some of the best people I've rolled with have never competed. They just go in and train and enjoy it, and they are on another level compared to everybody else. What is that focus? Do we have to sharpen the knife by competing? Or if not, what do older grapplers have as their goals if they're not focusing to win competitions or just give it a shot or whatever it is?
Yeah. Competition is generally not required to advance through the ranks. Most people never compete in jiu-jitsu. Probably 90% of all jiu-jitsu athletes never compete even once. Now, it's my personal conviction that whether you want to compete regularly as a lifestyle or not, that's a different question. But I think that as a jiu-jitsu athlete, you should at least step onto a competition mat a few times throughout your journey just to feel what that higher level of intensity feels like. Because even though you train hard in the gym, even though you're pushing yourself, there's still something a little different about stepping onto some unfamiliar mats. Everybody's watching. Everything feels different. You're in an unfamiliar environment, going up against an opponent who doesn't know you, doesn't care about you, doesn't care if you have to walk with a limp tomorrow. They're going to come at you with an intensity that you're rarely going to feel in the home academy. And then there's the pressure of the moment, the adrenaline, all those things. I think that those things are immensely valuable to experience at least a few times on your journey. But for the over 40 athlete, the calculus has to include the risk factor, the safety factor, because it's not like you can just, well, I suppose you can sign up for a competition and just go do it without training for it, but you're not going to have any success if you do that. Competition requires you to prepare. which means scaling up your training, rolling with more intensity, doing the strength and conditioning, all that stuff. And a lot of times it's the increased risk that you put yourself under during the training for the competition, not always the risk on competition day, although there is increased risk. It's the volume of training leading up to it. And so this becomes a very personal decision for everybody. I don't compete anymore. My body's starting to suffer a little, and I've got some issues that I'm having to manage, and pushing myself to that higher level of fitness and competitive intensity. It's just a little counterproductive for me at this stage. But that's a question that each person is going to need to answer for themselves. What I do believe is that you shouldn't feel less than if you decide to not compete. It's not a reflection on you. Now, you have to ask yourself, if the only reason why you're not competing is because you're scared, or you're scared to lose, well, that's not a good reason. In fact, that's a reason why you should have to confront those things about yourself. Yeah. But if that's not it, if it's just a calculus based on the fact that, you work 60 hours a week, you have a family life, you don't train that much, you're training for the fun of it, you're training because it makes you better, stress relief, all those things, well, that's enough. I mean, for that person, that's probably enough. They don't need to feel pressure to take their training to some higher level so they can go have competitive success. And then there's other people that love to compete regularly. It's just part of their identity. They love the challenge. They love that feeling that they get. And I know plenty of those guys too. So very, very individualized, no judgment either way, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe there are coaches that are highly competitive that encourage all their students to compete all the time. But, I was never one of those.
Yeah, because I see it all the time. There's that debate of like, are you a martial artist if you don't compete? And you think like you're a martial artist if you step on the mats. It's just an extra sense of that level of, you can find out more about yourself by competing. And I remember when I was training, I was shitting myself thinking about competing. And then I thought, that's a sign I should be doing it, because that's just another part of myself to develop, to learn about myself, or to overcome that fear by doing it. And I think we all go through that journey, and it's really hard to kind of compare ourselves again, that ego thing. And I get asked to cover a lot of books in the show. And when I saw you were bringing out a book, I thought, I have to get you on, because I know the level of quality that you'll put into this. And I really do mean this, but this is a book that every grappler should read, especially for people who are going into jiu-jitsu, especially if they're older, because you don't just cover the basics of here's a technique, here's that. You actually explain how to make it an enjoyable part of your life, how to get the most from it, how to find yourself through it, how to actually be a martial artist, not just a guy doing jiu-jitsu. And it is a phenomenal book, and it should be a must read for everybody. But for people who get the book,
thank you.
How would you want them to use it as a tool for going forward? If the book did its job perfectly and it did exactly as you wanted for each person reading it, what would a jiu-jitsu practitioner do differently in their training, their life, after reading your book?
Well, to me, it was the book that I wish someone had handed me on that first day of training 20 years ago.
100% agree.
Because I had to learn, I had to learn all those lessons myself. I had to learn about ego management. I had to learn about intensity. I had to learn, that frequency of training is better than high volume and high intensity. I had to learn. I've tried different ways of eating, paleo and keto and carnivore. Jiu-jitsu has forced me really to look into my life more holistically and examine, because everything impacts performance on the mat. And so to me, this is a book that I wish someone had handed me. It's just a blueprint. It's a guide on the journey. It's a handbook. It's not intended to be some deep, deep book that gives you every answer to every problem you have. It's more like me just pointing at the things that I think are important that will help you train with longevity and help you improve year after year, and how to calibrate, you know, what success means, redefining what success means when you're older. A lot of the book really doesn't, it's not necessarily intended for older athletes. I think a lot of it is just good, basic values that you should bring to jiu-jitsu even when you're younger.
Yeah.
But because I'm known more as the old guy that does jiu-jitsu, I thought I would orient it toward that because that's really my market.
So for those who are listening who think, I really want to try this, or I really want to go back to it, but at this stage in my life, I've got kids, I've got responsibilities, I've got a dicky knee, or I'm carrying a few extra pounds, or whatever it is. What do you want them to hear when they say, at this stage of my life, I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't think I'm good enough. I don't think I'm fit enough. I don't think I'm young enough to go and learn this sport, to start on this journey.
Yeah, the hardest part of the jiu-jitsu journey is getting yourself onto the mat that first day. And for a lot of people, it can be very, very difficult because it's scary. Maybe you've been sedentary for 20 years, you're carrying around extra weight, you don't move that well anymore, you're 47 years old, you're past your prime, and you're thinking, what am I doing? Really? Maybe I should just go take a CrossFit or yoga or something else. I don't know about this jiu-jitsu thing. But it's my conviction that it's possible to train safely at any age. You have to, number one, select a good training environment where your training partners aren't trying to kill you. And so what I always tell people is look at the schools that are closest to where you live. Start with the very closest one. Go watch class. Go see what they teach. Go watch how they spar. Go talk to the instructor. If you've got particular issues with your body, say, listen, I've got a hip that doesn't work so good, whatever, and get their opinion on that. And if you feel a good vibe and it feels right, then jump into a class. If they offer a beginner class, jump into the fundamentals class. That's a great place to start. But understand this, that, jiu-jitsu will improve your fitness a lot. Jiu-jitsu will improve your mobility. Jiu-jitsu will give you a lot of things that will improve you. But if you're starting older, I still think that you are better served by assessing what your body can do and correcting those areas that are problems. Maybe your shoulders are very inflexible. Maybe you've got a low back that just doesn't function very well, right? Go work on those things. I'm not saying necessarily before jiu-jitsu, or you can certainly do both simultaneously, but jump into jiu-jitsu, take a look at your body, begin assessing what kinds of things are limitations and what kinds of things are potentially going to make training a little more risky if you don't take care of. You use it as a vehicle to discover more about your body and improve those aspects. And then when you go in to train jiu-jitsu, again, you're on your own personal journey. You don't need to conquer the world in a day. You don't need to, all of a sudden go from no training to you're training 5 days a week. You're going to end up hurting yourself. Just ease into it. Begin getting your body functioning, get your weight under control, get your nutrition on point. Use it as a way to stimulate positive changes throughout your life. You don't have to change everything at once. Just start chipping away at it. And if you do those things, jiu-jitsu's, actually very safe. It's not risk-free, but all sports have some degree of risk, and jiu-jitsu, I think, all things considered, is relatively safe.
And would you think that's the bit you mean in the book about redefining success? It's no longer about taps or wins. It's about, are you on the mat day in, day out? Are you training for longevity rather than wins? Are you actually finding about yourself, fixing the things, going on this journey, overcoming the fears? Is that the true meaning of success in jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, we get too hung up on the taps or getting tapped. If you tap someone, that's a success. If you didn't get tapped, or if you got tapped, it's a failure. If you got the tap, it's a success. And there's no other successes or failures in anything you do in the academy. It's either I got tapped or I didn't, or I tapped. But those are just one metric out of many, many, many things. And they're not even the most important metrics. The real metric is, are you training consistently? Are you improving your fitness consistently? Are you getting more mobile? Are you developing greater knowledge, greater understanding? Do you understand the positions better than you did yesterday? And what all of those questions have in common is you versus the old you. Ultimately, if there was one meta message in my book, it would be that just compare yourself to you. This is about you and you becoming the best person you can become. You becoming the best version of yourself, and that's possible to do that at any age. But it requires you to compare yourself to you and not get so hung up on the dojo drama of who's tapping who and who caught me. And, those things are irrelevant, really. I mean, sure, we want to be effective in jiu-jitsu, and with training and skill, your ratio of taps versus getting tapped is going to naturally improve, and it's going to keep improving. But those things are just outcomes. The real benefit was all the work that training jiu-jitsu forced you to do.
I mean, I 100% agree, and I just wish I had this book before I started training, because there were so many things I looked at and I thought, I wish I'd known that before. I wish I'd focused on that before. And it's definitely a must read for any grappler of any age, of any stage of jiu-jitsu. But why should we buy it? It's a perfect time for a sales pitch. For somebody who's thinking, this sounds a great book, what would be how would you tell them? What would they need to know about the book if they're sitting on the fence, perhaps?
Well, it's a short book. It's not a lengthy read. You can actually sit down in probably 2 or 3 evenings and read the book. It's 22 chapters, but the chapters are short. So I tried to not, get too lost in the weeds and keep it. So it's one of those books that you can get a lot out of, I think, in a compressed period of time. And it's more of a handbook. It's not necessary to read the book sequentially. I've organized it in a sequence that I think makes sense for the book, but you can bounce around and read whatever chapters you feel like, or keep coming back to certain chapters. So I think it's just, if you're a jiu-jitsu nerd and you're into training and you're into jiu-jitsu, the book is just another perspective to add to your arsenal. And that's probably the best reason to buy it, is it's just going to probably help you in a few different areas. Some of that you might not have even considered before, especially if you're a little bit older trying to train.
And it'll definitely help them level up their jiu-jitsu. And I do hate myself for getting the plug in there at the end. And what do you want people to remember about this? What would you like them to take from this interview going forward, apart from buying the book?
Well, I started jiu-jitsu very late in life. I was 41 years old. That was 20 years ago. And, I'm not a world champion. I'm not someone that has made the competition arena how I've made myself famous or anything like that. I think that I'm just somebody that cracked the code on how to train sustainably with longevity in jiu-jitsu, how to keep it being fun year after year, how to keep, those lessons, those important lessons that jiu-jitsu teaches, how to keep those coming in, and ultimately I'm just someone that didn't quit, and I was able to crack that code. And so I hope my legacy is that I've been able to help people along the journey. And I think that's probably why people are drawn to my content, is I'm relatable in a way that maybe the world champion who was a freak athlete when they're young, well, they're not relatable to the average guy who's 39 years old starting jiu-jitsu, right? They look at that guy as, no, that guy had all the physical gifts that I don't have. But that Rick guy, okay, I can relate to him. I can relate to the struggles that he has because he's had those same struggles that I'm having. So I think that's probably the biggest benefit is that I can relate because I've been through all that.
And I think you undersell yourself because you teach it in a way that we can actually understand jiu-jitsu and how we can apply it to life. It's not just turn up 5 days a week and do that. You actually teach us the art of the skill. You actually teach us how to learn jiu-jitsu, how to make it part of our life, and you do it in such a fun, inviting way. But every one of your videos, you learn so much from it. Yeah, and that's why I think you're such a good coach about it, and you're so down to earth and humble and giving. How do you think this has changed you looking back now? After writing the book, does it surprise you when you actually try to put all your knowledge, your history, experience, and love into the book?
Yeah, well, there was more there than I thought there would be. As I mentioned initially, I thought it would be a much shorter book, even though it's not all that long. And there's actually more that I could have said. I had a bunch of chapter ideas that I ended up not developing just because I didn't fit with the time constraint I had. So, yeah, there's a lot there, and I'm just happy to have, each one of us gives back to jiu-jitsu in our own way, ultimately, and we do it either by being a good training partner with the people we train with, or by being a better husband, a better employee because we're more calm under pressure and those things. And so I think that ultimately it's important for each one of us to give back a little bit. And to me, writing a book and contributing with my videos and the events that I do, we run Old Grappler Summit, which is an over 40 retreat down here in San Diego. We do a couple events every year, and those are amazing, right? We get people from all over the world that show up. And so it's just my way of giving back to the art of jiu-jitsu and trying to stay in it because it's such a beautiful, transformative art that I love it and I love being part of it.
Love it. And, before you bring out more books and more, you do TED Talks and more instructionals and, you continue to change the way jiu-jitsu is learned and understood. How can we follow on your journey? How can we sign up for the seminars, for the workshops, for find you on social media? How can, before you become the superstar author like J.K. Rowling, how can we follow your journey?
Well, I have two primary websites. One is rickellis.com. It's just my name. And anything that's personal related to me is over there. The events that I do that are not Old Grappler Summit, I always announce and publicize those through rickellis.com. We've got a Costa Rica trip later toward the end of the year. I don't have that on the website yet. I'm building that out. So rickellis.com is a good place to find me. OldGrapplerSummit.com is where we publicize our over 40 camps that we run. And then on social, YouTube, I'm the Art of Skill on YouTube, Art of Skill channel. That's probably my number one social network. That's the most popular one for me. I'm on Instagram at Rick Ellis HQ and TikTok, Rick Ellis HQ, and Facebook. I think it's Rick Ellis HQ as well. So I'm on all the platforms. I'm happy when people friend me on Facebook or follow me on Instagram and all that. But YouTube is probably my big social media channel.
Well, that's it for another week. And thank you for listening. It's now time to take what you've learned and use it to develop and enhance your life with the key points mentioned. Listen, try it, embrace it, use it, and crush it. Now's your time to hit that next level in your life. If you liked this episode, then please leave a comment on the show notes or a review of the show on your podcast platform. Everything helps evolve the show. Until next week, keep seeking the next level in your life.